I remember the first time I met Kyle, my daughter's husband. He wasn't flashy, but he carried himself with a quiet confidence that made you want to trust him. The kind of man who made solid eye contact, offered a firm handshake, and listened more than he spoke. And back then, that was enough for me. He didn't come for money, that much was clear. But he worked hard. He built a modest construction business from the ground up, and I respected that. We had something in common there. I built my own wealth through discipline, sacrifice, and knowing when to stay quiet and observe. And Kyle, well, he seemed like a man who understood the value of patience. My daughter Brielle looked at him like he was the center of her world. That was the only thing that truly mattered to me. She was happy. That sparkle in her eye was back. The same one she had as a child when I took her to amusement parks, or when she used to fall asleep curled up with her books. Kyle made her laugh again, and for that alone, I opened my arms to him. They moved into a townhome about 15 minutes away from us, close enough for weekend dinners and Sunday barbecues, far enough for them to live their own life. Everything seemed normal, stable, respectable. Kyle would always show up on time, greet me with that same calm smile, and offer to help clean up after meals. He'd even ask for advice here and there, about saving, about business moves, about fatherhood. And I gave it freely. After all, he was family now. Still, something about him never quite settled right in my gut. It wasn't anything obvious. He never disrespected me, never raised his voice. But there was a kind of stillness behind his eyes. Like he was calculating, measuring, always a few thoughts deeper than he let on. I told myself I was imagining it, that maybe I was just being protective. You know how fathers are with their daughters. Over the first year of their marriage, Kyle proved himself. On paper, he kept his job, paid his bills, never got into trouble. But occasionally, when we were sitting on the back patio, drinking bourbon, there were things he said that didn't quite align with the man he portrayed. Once, he asked if I still had that vintage safe in my study, the one my father passed down to me. I found it strange at the time because I had never told him about it. I brushed it off, thinking maybe Brielle mentioned it. But in hindsight, that moment was the first thread in a much darker tapestry. He was polite, but never warm. Grateful, but never vulnerable. And people like that, people who never show their cracks, they're either hiding pain or hiding plans. I didn't want to believe the latter. I told my wife once that Kyle reminded me of a chess player. Always waiting, watching, planning his next move. She laughed and said I was just being dramatic. And maybe I was. But I've learned that when something doesn't sit right with you, it's better to trust that feeling than to silence it. Even if the person you're questioning is family. Looking back now, I realize Kyle never slipped up because he thought he didn't need to. He had charm, consistency, and time on his side. And the best cons are slow, patient, built over years of pretending. At the time, though, I didn't see a threat. I saw a man who married my daughter and was trying to find his place in our family. I wanted to believe in him. I really did. But what I didn't know was that Kyle wasn't just trying to be part of the family. He was trying to take something from it. And soon I'd find out just how far he was willing to go. For the first few months, our Sunday dinners became a tradition. My wife would cook a little too much, Brielle would bring a dessert from that bakery she loved downtown, and Kyle would always offer to set the table. It was the kind of routine that made you believe everything was fine. Normal. Peaceful. But the truth is, peace can be deceptive. It can hide a storm waiting to erupt. At first, I told myself the tension I felt was just the result of me overthinking. Kyle never raised his voice. He never got into arguments. But he had this way of watching people. Like he was scanning for weaknesses, gathering intel. During conversations, he'd go silent at the exact moment you'd expect a response. It wasn't rudeness, it was calculation. There were little signs that started to bother me, though I couldn't quite put a name to them at the time. He started complimenting our house a little too often, commenting on the finishes, the layout, even the security cameras mounted on the corners of the property. Once or twice, he even joked about how this kind of house must have some serious valuables locked away. I laughed along with him back then, but something inside me didn't. That gut feeling came knocking again, but quietly, like a whisper I could still ignore. One evening, over coffee and pie, Kyle leaned forward and asked me what I'd done to become so successful. He called it admiration, but his eyes, they told a different story. They didn't shine with curiosity. They narrowed, like a man trying to figure out where the cracks were in a vault door. My wife brushed it off, said it was nice to see him interested in the family legacy. But it felt off. And when Kyle thought no one was watching, he wasn't exactly subtle. He'd wander into my study longer than necessary. He'd peek at family photos, ask questions about certain heirlooms, and mention items that hadn't been discussed at the table. It was around that time I started to notice changes in Brielle, too. She was still the same kind-hearted woman I raised, but she had grown quieter. Not sad, just distant. The light in her eyes flickered less often. She'd smile during dinner, but it didn't reach as far as it used to. And when Kyle would make a joke at her expense, something small, like how she'd forgotten to salt the potatoes, she'd laugh, but I could see it hit her. Soft spots bruised by sharp words. She once offered to help me fix a drawer in the garage, something she used to love doing as a kid. But when Kyle stepped out to call someone, she froze. She said, "Never mind," and left the room. It wasn't like her. The more time passed, the more it felt like I was watching a performance. The polite son-in-law, the loving wife, the happy family. Every Sunday, a carefully scripted scene. But in the spaces between conversations, in the way Kyle's smile never reached his eyes, or the way Brielle flinched when he touched her shoulder, I knew something wasn't right. I didn't know what he was planning. I didn't even know if there was something concrete yet. But I did know this. When people are too perfect, too smooth, too calculated, it's not by accident. It's by design. And designs like that, they always have a target. I've always believed that when something feels off, it usually is. And the thing about Kyle was, he was just off enough to stay unnoticed. He never did anything outright wrong. He never slipped in a way that could be proven. But over time, the pieces he laid down didn't fit the picture he claimed to be building. It started with something simple. I got a call from an old friend who worked at the local bank. He said Kyle had applied for a sizable personal loan and listed me as a character reference, without telling me. I was surprised, not just because he hadn't asked, but because he and Brielle never mentioned needing money. When I casually brought it up over lunch one weekend, Kyle smiled and said it was just a small investment opportunity. He downplayed it, said it wasn't a big deal. But the way he responded, too quickly, too rehearsed, left me with a strange feeling in my gut. That same week, I noticed my study door was slightly ajar when I got home from a short business trip. It wasn't locked because it never needed to be. But my desk drawers were not quite how I left them. Nothing was taken. Nothing obvious, anyway. But I know my own space, and something had been moved. Files I hadn't touched in months had fingerprints. Even the leather chair had shifted a few inches from where I always left it. At first, I blamed my memory. Maybe I was being paranoid. But when I asked my wife if she'd been in there, she said no. And the only other person who'd been over in those days was Kyle. Still, I said nothing. I observed. That's what you do when you're unsure. You stop reacting and start recording. Not with cameras, not yet, but mentally. Behavior patterns. Questions he asked, what he focused on when he thought no one was paying attention. A week later, Kyle mentioned my insurance coverage during a football game. Not in a direct way. He said something like, "With a house this size, I bet your insurance policy could cover half the block." He laughed. I smiled back. But in my mind, that was the third red flag in a month. Who jokes about that? Who keeps talking about what other people have, how secure they are, how much their assets are worth? I went back and replayed every little thing he'd said over the past few months. Every compliment that doubled as a calculation. Every casual joke that felt like a scouting report. Every time he accidentally stayed back in the house while Brielle ran to the store. It wasn't just odd. It was patterned. It was too deliberate to be innocent. One night, after they'd gone home, I pulled out a notepad and started writing everything down. Not because I was building a case, at least not yet, but because I needed to know I wasn't imagining things. Because when your instincts keep whispering, but everyone else is smiling, you start to doubt yourself. But the list kept growing. Too fast, too specific. It wasn't just what Kyle was doing, it was how precise he was about doing it quietly. No confrontation, no mistakes, just subtle shifts. Misplaced trust, and a trail that only someone like me, someone who had spent decades protecting what he built, could see for what it really was. A setup. I didn't know what Kyle was after yet, but I knew one thing for sure. He wasn't here just to marry my daughter. He was here for something else. And whatever it was, he was getting closer to it. As much as I was starting to question Kyle, the part that truly unsettled me was the way Brielle began to change. It wasn't drastic at first, just a little quieter, a little more withdrawn. The brightness in her eyes dimmed gradually, like a candle losing oxygen, flickering without anyone noticing. She'd always been open with me. Even through her teenage years, even though heartbreaks and difficult choices, Brielle would talk. She had a way of processing life out loud, of sitting at the kitchen table late at night with a cup of tea, just needing to feel heard. But lately, those talks had stopped. I couldn't tell if she was too busy, too tired, or too scared. I started to pay closer attention. She'd still smile when she walked into the room, still hug her mother tightly and ask how we were doing, but it felt mechanical, like she was on autopilot, a performance with no soul behind it. Once, after dinner, I caught her alone on the back porch. She was staring at her phone, scrolling through photos. But when I walked up, she quickly locked the screen and looked up with a forced smile. That wasn't like her. Brielle never hid things like that. Her shoulders were tense. Her laugh had a crack in it. I asked if everything was okay. She said yes. I asked again. She paused, then nodded. Just tired, she whispered. But I saw her fingers trembling when she picked up her glass. And when Kyle stepped outside and casually wrapped his arm around her waist, she flinched, just slightly, but enough for me to catch it. Something was wrong. I knew it in my bones, but she wouldn't say it, and I wasn't going to push her. Not yet. The last thing I wanted was for her to shut me out completely. A week later, she came over alone, said she needed help with her car's registration. We ended up in the driveway, paperwork scattered across the hood. And in that brief hour, I saw her old self resurface. She laughed at my dumb jokes. She even teased me about the way I still used a physical calendar. But then, when her phone buzzed and she saw Kyle's name on the screen, it was like someone flipped a switch. Her entire mood changed. The light vanished. She mumbled something about needing to go and left in a rush, leaving the papers half-filled and her coffee untouched. That night, I told my wife, "Something's wrong with Brielle, and I think Kyle has something to do with it." She hesitated but eventually admitted she'd noticed it too. The missed calls, the way Brielle always had an excuse not to stay long, the way her voice had lost its usual spark. I didn't want to believe my daughter was unhappy, but I couldn't deny the evidence. And what haunted me most wasn't the silence. It was that her silence seemed like fear. Kyle hadn't just been studying me, he was changing her, slowly, quietly, and the deeper I looked, the more I realized the daughter I knew was slipping away, and I had no idea how far he had already pulled her in. It was a quiet Sunday morning when the question slipped out of my mouth. Not planned, not rehearsed. It just came from that place in a father's soul that knows when something isn't right. We were in the garage, me, Kyle, and Brielle. She'd stopped by with him to drop off an old bookshelf they no longer needed. Kyle was fiddling with the straps on the trailer, and Brielle was brushing sawdust off her jeans. It felt like any other ordinary moment. But ordinary moments are where truth likes to hide. I looked at Brielle and asked gently, "Sweetheart, are you happy?" She froze. Not visibly, not dramatically, but the pause in her body, the tightness in her jaw, the way her eyes didn't meet mine, that was all I needed to see. Kyle didn't notice, or at least pretended not to. He was too busy pretending to fix a strap that didn't need fixing. She gave a small laugh. "Of course, Dad." But it was the kind of laugh people use when they're hiding something in their throat. The kind you use to cover pain. And I didn't press her. Not yet. Because sometimes the worst thing you can do is corner someone you love when they're already trapped. Later that night, the question kept echoing in my mind. "Are you happy?" I thought about how many times I'd asked that question to employees, to friends, even to myself. And I realized something terrifying. People lie most convincingly when they're lying to survive. From that day forward, I stopped pretending that this was just in my head. I started watching everything. Kyle's movements, his words, his inconsistencies. I even checked the security logs from our home system, and that's when things got strange. There were multiple entries in the log from days when no one was supposed to be home. Short time frames. Front door open, study door open, then both closed again. At first, I thought it might have been my wife, but she was with me on every one of those days. I even double-checked with her. No one was home, except someone had been. I installed a second motion sensor, hidden away from the visible ones, and started saving the data directly to a private folder. Then I waited. 2 weeks later, the alert came through. Movement. Midday. House empty. And 30 minutes after the alert, Kyle and Brielle showed up for dinner as if nothing had happened. That night, as Kyle made casual conversation about cryptocurrency and new business opportunities, I was staring at a phone in my pocket that told me everything I needed to know. He had been inside my house when we weren't home. That's when everything shifted. The question I asked Brielle didn't just open my eyes to her pain. It cracked open the whole facade. Kyle wasn't just a little off. He wasn't just calculating, he was planning something. And now I had the proof. The time for guessing was over. It was time to play my own game. Because if Kyle thought he was the only one keeping score, he was about to learn who taught the class. Once I had the proof that Kyle was sneaking into my home, something inside me clicked. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. You see, anger clouds judgment. But focus sharpens every instinct you have. I knew I couldn't confront him outright. That would only make him retreat, recalibrate, and come back smarter. I needed him to feel safe. I needed him to believe he was still in control. That's how you bait a predator. You let them think you're still prey. I started small. Left decoy files in my study, boring financial documents, old insurance policies, a few notes about non-existent investments. I even wrote a fake letter to my attorney and left it in plain sight, hinting that I was planning to shift my assets soon. Then I made sure to mention casually in front of Kyle that I'd be leaving town for a few days to visit an old friend. His eyes lit up just a little too brightly when I said it. And that's when I knew. He was going to take the bait. Before the trip, I set up motion-triggered cameras in the study and hallway. Small, hidden, infrared. Nothing visible to the naked eye. I even left the front door security system on its usual routine so it wouldn't raise suspicion. Everything was normal. Everything was controlled. Then, I left town. At least, that's what Kyle thought. In reality, I checked into a hotel just 10 minutes away and watched the camera feeds from my phone. For 2 days, nothing happened. But on the third afternoon, just before 2 p.m., I saw him. Kyle, letting himself in with the spare key he must have copied months ago. He moved like someone who had done this before. Confident, quiet, straight to the study. He opened drawers, scanned documents, pulled out my laptop, then plugged in a flash drive. He wasn't just snooping, he was copying files. That was all I needed. But I didn't stop there. I let him leave. Let him think it went unnoticed. Because one catch doesn't expose a con. I wanted to see how far he was willing to go. Over the next 2 weeks, I set more traps, planted more fake information, monitored more activity. Kyle returned twice, each time a little bolder, a little more curious. He even started accessing my home Wi-Fi while I was away, digging through cloud backups linked to decoy folders I had created just for him. Meanwhile, I started documenting everything. Dates, times, footage, even the MAC address of the device he used to access the network. I wasn't just catching him, I was building a digital map of his movements, his methods, his obsession. But there was one more thing I needed before I could make my move. I needed to know why. What was his endgame? Was it just greed, or was there something deeper, more personal? That answer came from a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. One night, Brielle and Kyle came over for dinner. After dessert, she went to help her mother in the kitchen, while Kyle stepped onto the back patio to take a call. But he didn't know I had rewired the outdoor intercom a week earlier. I heard every word. "Yeah, it's almost done," he said. "He's sitting on way more than she told me. If we move fast, we can get the accounts transferred before he notices." My blood went cold. She? Who was she? Was he talking about Brielle? I didn't say a word that night. Didn't even flinch. But deep down, I knew I was staring at someone who wasn't just robbing me. He was using my daughter. Or worse, he had made her an accomplice. It was time. The trap was set, the lines were baited, and Kyle had taken the hook, greedily. Now, all that remained was the takedown. Kyle had no idea I was watching him unravel. In his mind, he was the mastermind, slick, undetectable, and steps ahead of everyone. He walked into my house with that arrogant little smirk, shaking my hand like a man who believed he owned the room. Every word he spoke was soaked in false charm. He complimented my wine, praised my landscaping, even asked how my old back was doing. But beneath the politeness, I saw it: control. He thought he was in control. What he didn't know was that every time he broke into my house, every time he accessed a file, every time he whispered into a phone, he was leaving a breadcrumb. And I was following, but I didn't just watch. I mirrored him. Let him see only what I wanted him to see. I continued to drop subtle clues. A financial folder labeled Final Accounts, a printed email thread with my fake accountant, even a fabricated life insurance policy with my name on it, and a massive payout, one that just so happened to list Brielle as the primary beneficiary. Kyle bit down on every single one of them. He started asking more questions at dinner, probing, slipping in comments like, "So you're thinking of consolidating everything soon? Or it's smart to get things in order, especially at your age." It was almost laughable. He thought he was being clever. He thought I didn't see through it. Meanwhile, I ramped up the game. I scheduled a fake appointment with a trust attorney and made sure Brielle overheard me confirming it on the phone. I knew she'd mention it to Kyle. And sure enough, 2 days later, Kyle sent me a text. Just checking in. Just wondering if I'd need help moving files or organizing things. So helpful. So caring. It was pathetic. The more he thought he was winning, the more reckless he became. He accessed the cloud files twice in 1 week. He took photos of my home office with his phone, badly too, like someone who thought no one was watching. And then, just when I thought he couldn't get bolder, he left a folder open on my desktop by accident during one of his little visits. A folder that didn't exist until I checked the system logs. That was the mistake. That was the crack. Because for the first time, Kyle showed his hand. He wasn't just snooping anymore, he was starting to transfer information. He created a dummy company name and tried to send one of the fake wire instructions to a spoofed email. But I caught it. Not because I'm brilliant, but because he's sloppy when he's overconfident. I could see it in the way he looked at me now. That false patience, that practiced smile. He wasn't just waiting for the opportunity, he thought he'd already won. He believed I was the aging fool, the blind father-in-law sitting on a pile of money, oblivious to the storm creeping in. But here's the thing about men like Kyle. They always think the quiet ones are weak. They mistake observation for ignorance, silence for submission. But what he didn't understand is that I wasn't just waiting. I was building. Building the moment. Building the hammer that would drop with enough force to ruin everything he thought he had. And the best part? He was helping me build it. Every step, every click, every smug glance, he wasn't outplaying me. He was digging his own grave. I never wanted to believe my daughter could be part of this. For weeks, I had told myself that maybe Kyle had manipulated her. Maybe she was just naive. Maybe she was too in love to see the truth. But the more I watched, the harder that lie became to hold. And the cracks in Kyle weren't the only ones beginning to show. Brielle was unraveling too. It started in the small ways. She stopped making eye contact during our weekly dinners. Her once bright laughter had a forced edge to it, as though she was trying to convince herself that everything was normal. One night, she brought over a pie she used to bake with her mother, but she forgot half the ingredients. She brushed it off with a laugh, but I could see the storm building behind her eyes. She wasn't sleeping well. Her hands shook when she poured the wine. Her voice cracked when she spoke too long. Something inside her was fighting itself. And then came the moment I knew something was deeply wrong. She stayed behind one evening while Kyle ran out to make a business call. I was cleaning up the dishes when she walked into the kitchen and leaned against the counter, her face pale, eyes red-rimmed. "Dad," she said, barely above a whisper, "do you think people can change who they are?" I looked at her, heart tightening in my chest. "Why do you ask that?" She hesitated, then shook her head and forced a smile. "Just wondering." But she wasn't just wondering. That was the voice of someone drowning, unsure whether to scream or stay silent. I knew in that moment she was starting to see Kyle for what he was. And more importantly, she was starting to see what she had become in his orbit. I didn't push her. I didn't tell her what I knew. Instead, I handed her a cup of tea and simply said, "When you're ready to talk, I'll listen." She nodded, eyes welling with tears, but said nothing. The guilt was working on her now, chipping away at the walls Kyle had built. A few days later, she sent me a message. Nothing major, just a photo of a family trip we took when she was a teenager. No caption, no follow-up, just the image, a memory, a life before him. I responded with a heart. She replied with a single word, "Sorry." It crushed me, not because of what she might have done, but because of how far she'd fallen to feel that kind of shame. My daughter, once so full of conviction, so full of love, had become a shadow of herself. And Kyle had done that. He had taken her mind, her confidence, and twisted it into something that made her question her worth. But here's what Kyle didn't know. Guilt is a seed. Once it's planted, it grows, slowly, quietly, until one day it bursts through the lies like sunlight through a crack in the wall. And Brielle's walls were crumbling faster than he realized. That weekend, she canceled their dinner plans. Said she wasn't feeling well. He came alone, and for the first time he looked unsettled. Pacing, checking his phone too often, making excuses for her absence. That's when I saw it. He was starting to lose his grip on her. And he knew it. After he left, I received another text from Brielle. "He told me you're hiding things," she wrote. "He said you don't trust me." I paused, then typed back carefully. "I've always trusted you. I've never trusted him." She didn't respond for hours. When she finally did, it was just one sentence. "I don't know who I am anymore." That broke me. But it also told me something else. She was waking up, and once someone wakes up from a nightmare, they don't go back to sleep. The pieces finally came together the night I found the document. A single folder left open on a shared cloud drive. Carelessly labeled, probably because Kyle didn't think I'd ever look there. Inside were scanned files, notes, fake signatures, and a partial draft of a document that chilled my blood. A fake power of attorney, with my name on it. That was the moment I realized Kyle wasn't just stealing bits of information, he was planning something much bigger. This wasn't about small-time fraud or a quick cash grab. This was calculated, timed, designed to gut me from the inside out. According to the timeline in his notes, it was supposed to happen next month. I was to be on a vacation with my wife, one Kyle offered to help book. While we were away, a forged document would authorize him to make financial transfers. Another file, barely hidden, was a proposed liquidation schedule. Real estate, investments, my company's dormant accounts, all of it. Gone in less than a week. He'd even listed contingencies, what to do if my daughter found out, what to say if I became suspicious. He had scripts, rehearsed lies, a version of the truth tailored for every potential confrontation. He was going to rob me blind and make it look like I gave him permission. I sat there for hours, staring at the screen, rereading the plan. And what made it worse wasn't just the betrayal, it was the detail. The time he had taken. The depth of the deception. This wasn't an impulsive crime. Kyle had been planting the seed for over a year. All the charm, the casual visits, the tech help he'd offered with my systems, it was all part of the setup. And Brielle, she must have suspected. Whether she knew the full extent or not, I could see now why she looked so haunted. She had felt the walls closing in too. I printed everything, carefully, encrypted a backup. Then, I unplugged the entire system from the internet. Kyle would notice, and that was the point. I wanted him to feel the panic. I wanted him to realize the window was closing. But more than anything, I wanted him to rush. Desperate men make sloppy decisions, and I needed him sloppy. The next morning he called me, cheerful as ever, asked if I still wanted his help booking that vacation. I played along, told him we were thinking of pushing it back, that I wasn't feeling quite right. His voice dipped just for a second. "Everything okay?" I told him I just needed rest. He said he understood, but I knew what that pause meant. He knew something was off, and now he'd have to decide, speed up his plan or abandon it altogether. He wouldn't abandon it. Guys like Kyle never walk away from a jackpot they think they deserve. That evening, Brielle showed up unannounced. No makeup, hoodie, eyes swollen. She stood in my doorway for a full minute before saying, "Dad, I need to talk to you." I let her in, heart pounding. She sat at the kitchen table, clutching a mug she never sipped from. Then she said it. I think Kyle's going to do something bad. She didn't know the details, but she'd seen enough, and she felt something coming. I asked her if she was ready to know everything. She nodded, tears already spilling over. So I showed her the plan, the files, the forged documents. Her face went pale, she covered her mouth, and then she whispered, "He said it was just insurance. He said it was just in case something happened to you." I told her the truth, that men like Kyle don't plan just in case, they plan to make it happen. And now, it was time for us to make sure he never got the chance. That was the night everything shifted. I wasn't just the victim anymore, I wasn't even just the bait. Now I had an ally. And Kyle? Kyle had no idea the trap was already closing around him. It happened on a Thursday night. Rain tapping on the windows, wind howling outside like some invisible force was warning me. I had left the house dark on purpose, no porch light, no movement, no sign of life. Brielle was staying at a friend's place, just like we planned. My wife was still out of town, and I was waiting in the shadows, sitting behind the dimmed screen of my security setup. The cameras were all hardwired to a local drive, no cloud access this time, no chance for someone to wipe the evidence. I wasn't going to just catch Kyle. I was going to bury him with proof. At 2:13 a.m., the side gate clicked open. Not forced, not stumbled into. Clicked precisely and quietly. He had a key. Of course he did. He probably took it months ago, thinking I'd never notice one missing from the rack. He slipped in like he belonged there, dressed in all black, gloves on, backpack ready. No mask. Just that smug belief that he was untouchable. He headed straight to the back door, went for the second flower pot, and pulled out the spare key I had left there on purpose. I watched it all unfold on the screen, my pulse steady. He opened the door and stepped inside like a man strolling through his own living room. He didn't hesitate, went right for the study. That's where I'd planted the decoy, folders packed with old codes, outdated banking details, just enough information to look real. He snapped photos like he was on a mission. His movements were fast, confident, like he'd rehearsed this. Then he moved to the locked drawer, the one I had rigged. If forced, it would trigger a silent alert that flashed across my monitor. I watched him try to pick it open. A minute later, the alert blinked across my screen. That was my signal. But I didn't confront him, not yet. I wanted him to finish, to feel victorious. He fumbled with my old laptops, probably trying to access the encrypted folders I'd moved offline. Nothing loaded. He clicked again. Still nothing. And for the first time, I saw it. The crack. His face shifted, just slightly. A flicker of doubt. He paused, looked around, and then took the bait folder before slipping back into the night. He had no idea that every second had been recorded from multiple angles. By sunrise, I had 3 copies of the footage stored in 3 separate locations. One at my lawyer's office, one in a locked safety deposit box, and one right at home in a fireproof safe. There would be no way out for him. No denial, no lies to hide behind. At 9:15 that morning, he showed up to my front door with 2 coffees, and that same fake smile. "Thought I'd surprise you," he said, like he hadn't just committed a felony 6 hours earlier. I played along. "Didn't expect company this early," I said, taking the coffee. He laughed and told me he couldn't sleep. I looked into his eyes, searching for the man who thought he was smarter than me. But all I saw was desperation, hiding behind charm. Everything in me wanted to throw the footage in his face, to tell him it was over. But this wasn't the moment for that. I needed him to believe he'd won. Because when people think they've succeeded, they relax. They get arrogant. They talk too much. And that's when you bury them, not with emotion, but with precision. So I smiled, talked about the weather, let him drink his coffee in my kitchen while I counted the seconds until I'd turn his entire world upside down. Kyle thought last night was his victory. He had no idea it was the beginning of his end. I didn't plan to show Brielle the footage right away. A part of me still wanted to protect her. I kept thinking, maybe if I handled everything behind the scenes, I could spare her from knowing the full extent of Kyle's betrayal. But the truth has a weight to it, one that presses on your chest until you either carry it together or it crushes you alone. She showed up the next day, unannounced, eyes tired and voice low. She said Kyle had been distant, defensive. She said he kept checking his phone like he was waiting for something. And she asked me point blank, "Dad, is something going on?" I told her to sit down. I took a deep breath and said, "There's something you need to see, and it's going to hurt." Her hands trembled as I opened the video files on my laptop. I didn't narrate, I didn't comment. I just let her watch. Every second of it, Kyle slipping into the house, stealing documents, trying to break into the drawer. Her mouth opened slightly, but she didn't speak. Her face didn't move. She watched the whole recording like she was staring at someone else's nightmare, not her own. When the video ended, I closed the laptop and sat in silence, waiting for her to speak. But she just stared at the table for what felt like forever. Then finally, she asked the question I knew was coming. "How long have you known?" I told her the truth, that I'd suspected him for a while, that I found evidence weeks ago, that I didn't come to her sooner because I wasn't sure if she was ready, or if she'd believe me. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "I think I did believe you. I just didn't want to." She looked broken. Not angry, not hysterical, just hollow. And that's what made it worse. She wasn't shocked that Kyle could do something like this. She was ashamed that she'd seen the signs and stayed quiet. I reached across the table and took her hand. "You don't have to blame yourself," I said. "He's been playing a long game, manipulating both of us. You're not the fool here. He is." She nodded slowly, but the pain in her eyes didn't fade. Then she asked, "What happens now?" I told her we had options: legal action, exposure, quiet revenge, but I wasn't going to make that decision without her. She was part of this now, not just as a bystander, but as someone who had been hurt, lied to, and used. She deserved a say in how it ended. She wiped a tear from her cheek and said, "I want him to know that I know. I want to see the look on his face when he realizes he's lost everything." I nodded. That made two of us. We spent the next few hours going through the documents together. Every plan he'd written, every forged file, every step of the robbery he thought he'd pull off. And as the shock wore off, I saw something shift in Brielle. She wasn't just heartbroken anymore. She was angry. She was focused. She wasn't going to cry over him. She was going to help me take him down. That night, we made a new plan, together. A plan to end this story not with rage, but with justice. To show Kyle exactly who he underestimated. And to remind him that when you try to rob a man of everything he's built, you better make sure his daughter isn't watching. Because now, she was. The next morning, Kyle showed up like clockwork. Same casual smirk, same relaxed walk. Like he hadn't been caught on camera sneaking into my house and stealing what he thought were sensitive documents. But what changed was Brielle. She didn't rush to greet him. She didn't ask him how he slept or if he wanted coffee. She just stood by the doorway, arms crossed, watching him like she was seeing a stranger. He walked in, clearly sensing the cold air. "Everything okay?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Brielle didn't answer. She looked at me. I nodded. She stepped aside and I took the lead. "Kyle, why don't you sit down? We need to talk." He hesitated, just for a second, but then shrugged and sat, that fake calm still dripping from him. "Sure," he said. "What's up?" I pulled out my laptop, opened the video and turned the screen toward him. No introduction, no warning, just hit play. His smile twitched as the footage rolled. The moment he saw himself on camera, clear as day, entering the house, moving through the hallway, he blinked fast. "Wait, what is this?" he asked, already reaching for the pause key. I stopped his hand. "Keep watching." By the time the video showed him trying to access the drawer, his face had drained of color. He looked between me and Brielle, desperate to read our expressions. Hers was cold, unreadable. Mine, unblinking. When the video ended, I leaned forward. "So, Kyle, anything you want to tell us?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He tried to gather himself. And then it began. The spin. "Look, this isn't what it looks like. I wasn't stealing anything. I thought I saw something suspicious in your office. I was trying to protect the family." Brielle scoffed. "By breaking in at 2 a.m. and going through my father's files?" Kyle stammered. "I didn't want to wake anyone. I know it looks bad, but I swear I wasn't going to take anything. I just had a bad feeling." I said nothing. I let the silence stretch because silence has weight. He squirmed, filling the air with lies. "I thought someone had hacked your accounts. I was checking for signs. Maybe I should have told you, but I didn't want to scare Brielle." His eyes darted to her. You know me, babe. I'd never hurt your dad. I just didn't want to raise alarms if it turned out to be nothing. That's when she laughed. Not out of humor, but disbelief. A short, sharp breath that cut through the fog of his lies. You know what's worse than you robbing him? She said. You still thinking I'm dumb enough to believe anything you say. Kyle's face froze. The charm drained. The rehearsed confidence slipped. He looked at me as if I'd jump in, defend him, and ease the burn. But I didn't. I wanted him to feel what it was like when the curtain falls and the actor's left exposed. He tried one last angle. Remorse. Look, I messed up. I panicked. I made a mistake. Can't we just talk about this? Work it out like adults? His voice softened, like he was appealing to a boardroom full of investors. Like this was just a misunderstanding between professionals. But this wasn't business. This was family. And he crossed a line that no apology could fix. I stood up. You have until the end of the day to get your things and leave the house. Don't contact Brielle. Don't contact me. And don't even think about spinning this story to anyone else, because if you do, that footage goes public. Do you understand me? He stood too, jaw clenched, eyes scanning for any opening left. But there wasn't one. Brielle turned away before he could speak. And that was it. The man who thought he was playing us had just played himself. Kyle left without another word. No apology, no fight. Just the quiet shuffle of a man who knew the game was over. I watched from the porch as he carried a single duffel bag down the walkway, shoulders hunched, head low. The same man who once strutted into family dinners with swagger now looked like a ghost, hollowed out by the weight of his own actions. We didn't tell anyone what happened. Not at first. Brielle and I agreed. No dramatic announcements, no Facebook posts, no warnings to extended family. Let the silence speak for itself. Let people wonder. Let him try to explain it without digging a deeper hole. A few days later, my lawyer made the quiet calls. The bank account Kyle tried to tap into? Frozen. The business loan paperwork he forged? Turned over to authorities. The security footage? Filed away safely with a timestamp and legal backup. Everything was handled without noise. No lawsuits, no police raids. Just a precision strike. Clean, surgical, and final. He tried, of course. I heard through a friend that he went to Brielle's cousin, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that I had set him up, that it was some twisted test of loyalty, but no one bought it. His story shifted too many times. His charm no longer held weight, and when people looked him in the eye, they saw it, that flicker of panic, the fear of a man with no cards left to play. Brielle didn't talk about it much, but I saw it in her posture, in her voice. The way she moved, a little lighter, slept a little deeper. She had grieved the fantasy, and now she was moving on, not just from him but from the part of herself that felt the need to defend what should have never been defended in the first place. As for me, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't throw a party or gloat. What I felt was something deeper, something more still. Closure. The kind that doesn't shout, but exhales. Because when someone tries to rob you, not just of your things, but of your trust, your peace, your family, and you expose them without raising your voice, that's a power they can never take back. The quiet dismantling of Kyle's plan wasn't just revenge. It was protection. It was the preservation of everything he thought he could infiltrate and manipulate. And he failed. Not because I fought him loudly, but because I refused to play his game on his terms. Sometimes, justice doesn't come with a bang. It comes with stillness, with careful steps, with knowing when to speak and when to let the truth do all the talking. After Kyle left, the house felt different, not emptier, just clearer. Like someone had opened a window and let the stale air out. The tension that used to hover over dinner, the subtle coldness in Brielle's eyes, the way I always kept one foot emotionally off the ground, it was gone, and in its place there was space. Not silence, but peace. Brielle stayed with me for a few weeks. We didn't talk much about him. We talked about everything else. Memories from when she was little, her dreams for the future, things we hadn't had the space to talk about in years. It was as if she was coming back to life. One honest conversation at a time. One night over tea she asked me, "Did you ever think it would come to this?" I told her the truth. I didn't think it would go this far. But I always knew something wasn't right. She nodded, staring into her cup. I think I knew too, but I wanted so badly for it to work, for him to be who I hoped he was. I told her something then I wish someone had told me earlier in life. Wanting someone to be good doesn't make them good. It just blinds you to what they are. She didn't cry. She didn't break down. She just breathed in that truth and let it settle, like a stone at the bottom of a calm lake. In the weeks that followed, she got stronger. She moved out, got her own place, started therapy, not to fix herself, but to find herself again. And I didn't hover. I didn't try to control the process. I just supported her, quietly, steadily, the way a father should when the storm finally passes. As for me, I got back to my routines. Gardening, reading, volunteering at the community center. Life didn't go back to how it was before Kyle, but maybe that was the point. It moved forward. And I let it. I didn't feel the need to tell people what happened. The ones who mattered could read between the lines, and the ones who didn't, they didn't need to know. Revenge stories often end with fire and fury, with confrontations and public takedowns, but mine ended with something softer and stronger. Boundaries, truth, and the quiet rebuilding of trust, brick by brick. Kyle tried to steal something he could never understand, our foundation. But what he didn't know was that real foundations aren't built on lies or appearances or manipulation. They're built on moments like these. Honest, painful, transformative. One afternoon, Brielle stopped by unannounced. She brought lunch. We sat outside under the old oak tree, the one she used to climb when she was a little girl. She smiled and said, "I'm okay, Dad. I really am." And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. That was the new chapter. Not just for her, but for both of us. A chapter with no hidden schemes, no watching our backs, no pretending. Just two people who went through hell and came out wiser. And while Kyle may have thought he was the smartest man in the room, he forgot one thing. A father will always see what others miss. And when you try to rob him of his legacy, he won't yell. He won't run. He'll simply wait and win. So let me ask you something. If someone you trusted tried to rob you, not just of your money, but of your peace, your family, your legacy, how would you respond? Would you explode, or would you outthink them in silence? This wasn't just a story of betrayal. It was a reminder that real strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it watches, waits, and then strikes when the moment is right. Quietly, but with precision. Because the best revenge isn't loud, it's permanent. If this story hit home, don't just scroll away. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment below. I want to know, what would you have done in his shoes? Would you have stayed silent, or burned it all down? And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe to Revenge is Mine and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story where betrayal gets exposed and justice hits harder than expected. We bring you real emotion, real schemes, and the kind of revenge that leaves an impact. Thanks for watching. Stay sharp, stay silent, and remember, revenge is best served cold.